Hey, welcome to Moodboard. My name is Aaron.
And this is Cesar.
We're two creatives helping others unlock their creative potential by sharing meaningful and insightful conversations. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
The first time we met, as I remember, we were in a class together in SCAD almost a decade ago, or a little more than a decade ago. And I think we started really bonding over the work that we were doing and also just like design and books and movies as well. I just remember a lot of our conversations were revolved around those themes. And recently we had a conversation for my newsletter, and it just reminded me of just how enjoyable it is to hang out and chat with you. And so I remember just thinking out of the blue, hey, I'm gonna ask Cesar if he'd be down to record a podcast and just chat, and really not so much look at it as a podcast, but just a conversation between friends who love design and have had different experiences and are curious about it.
Yeah, and also
And
like how we can spark different conversations and just like a good, healthy back and forth, different points of view, and also exposing people to, you know, to what creativity could be, could become. And yeah, just by having good conversations around design and creativity, ideas, curiosity, which are ingredients that I don't know have been lost or that are lacking, that are like, that's why the industry struggles with or has challenges in terms of bringing innovation, new ideas onto the day-to-day lives. So yeah, hopefully these conversations can help facilitate the creation or the birth of, of new ideas.
you're touching on something that's so relevant to now with the automation of creativity and the outsourcing of it to software. It's quite, I think it's a really interesting time that we're living in, because we can prompt a machine to generate new connections. And I think it's both exciting, and at the same time, it's prompting us to think what I think about our role in the creative process as human beings. What's the difference between what a machine can generate and what only can come through a person? And I think those are like really interesting questions that are starting to arise, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I know, and these are interesting topics that we could address throughout these conversations, and hopefully we cover or spark, trigger new ways of thinking from our conversations. Because I feel like media, articles, newspapers, or like design blogs, um, sometimes they hit the right note, sometimes, only sometimes. But I feel like we can also do our due diligence to also try to attempt to maybe spark, yeah, different ways of thinking.
yeah, and I think some of the things that you talked about in our previous conversation really inspired me in in just how you see the world, looking for inspiration in places that are often overlooked. That I think that's something that is very valuable. At least for me, it triggered these thoughts of okay, everyone's looking in this direction and people are going in masses towards this new thing that is currently trending or currently very popular, but where are where's the like in the curiosity telling me to go? And
Mm-hmm.
what are some things that could potentially be overlooked by if I wasn't paying attention on a walk, what could I miss? And that when you mentioned that you like to look at things that people wear that are too big for them or they're wearing it not in the way they were intended to be worn, that really got my gears going.
And I think that's the beauty of being open to that kind of thinking or seeking for that kind of inspiration, because what we're looking for is human interpretation, not just only the capacity of humans being able to follow instructions.
Mm.
Because when everyone follows instruction, the outcome is the same.
Mm.
When you interpret a process on your own, things might be a little bit different, and things might be a little bit different from the other person to the other person. So you see human elements, or like the human nature, being resembled, which is really important for the creative process and for just the beauty of what humans can do, which is create. I think there is a moment in time for to replicate, but in moments where we have a lot of challenges with supply chain, we have a lot of challenges with manufacturing overseas, or like relying on manufacturing overseas. We have to start thinking about ways, okay, how can we be independent, autonomous, and how can we rely on ourselves and on other people to create products that are good for us and not just good for marketing or good for the economy type of situation, but how can we truly create products that are good for us?
I think the exciting part of having like artificial intelligence be able to assist with the generation of ideas and machines being able to 3D print some kind of or a design that you created, they're always a degree removed from having a conversation with another human being and ping-ponging ideas that way, or just even carving out whatever it is that you design with your own hands. And I think there is a place for both of these different modes of creation, but that human element, I think it's just something that we're still trying to understand, like what is it that makes it special? Is it even special? You know, some people might say, hey, I don't care that this shoe was made by, you know, a robot. I just want it to be low cost. Whereas another person might say, I really care that this was handmade by someone in a little shop in Italy and they've been doing it for 60 years, you know?
That's a very interesting example, because I was thinking about that this morning in the shower. I was thinking about how how will our relationship with products change if we were purchasing the product from the person that made them. So I was thinking about mobile architecture. It's been on my mind for the past couple of years. There is a book about it, but mobile architecture is, thinking about how to make these spaces that can come with you, that can go with you everywhere you go. And I'm thinking, okay, what if you were to either assemble or make something within that space that you could either sell or you don't have to sell, but like just have that exchange with someone, and that person being able to interact and have a relationship with the person that made it. I think that could yield for interesting results, or like interesting emotional attachments to the product that you have acquired. And maybe it could be the steps in the right direction towards us valuing what we have, because we know the person that made it. We know, um, yeah, we have a personal attachment with the person that made it, whether it was by hand or through like machinery assisted methods.
Yeah.
And then, you know, after these conversations of us in terms of like the challenges or like this new frontier in the creative realm, I think it would be good for us to touch on the reasoning behind, or the reasons behind why we decided to name this podcast Moodboard.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that another reason why I look at everyday elements throughout the day, it's because it's also important for us to create our own pool of inspiration. Because when we curate and craft a pool of inspiration that is unique to ours, I think the starting process, the starting point of the creation process, it's gonna be unique, because you are using inspiration that no one else has. Versus, let's say, all the designers go to Google Images, they use, and this happens often, where you look at people's portfolios and then you come across similar images, or like the same images throughout their mood boards.
Yeah.
So people are using those images as an inspiration, or like feeding from that energy, that then translates into the products and the process that they are creating. However, if you were to create your own inspiration, those photos on the mood board would be unique, because you took them yourself and no one else did. Therefore, the starting point of the product creation that you're using, it's unique. So there's a important emphasis. There should be an important emphasis in the mood board, which is, I think, why we felt that mood board was the perfect resemblance of our idea behind this podcast.
Yeah. And I remember when we were thinking about what the graphics would be for the Moodboard podcast, I remember distinctively that you mentioned, hey, what if we made it by hand? What if we cut up different letters and put it together in that way? And I remember giving it a go and going on the hunt for letters and type and putting it together. And this could have easily been done with Figma or some kind of digital software. I even tried a digital generator at one point. But there was a difference between moving pixels and getting something to generate an image versus going on a quest and cutting out these letters and putting them together. And I think that what you said, the origin, is so important. And it's so important to go on your individual quest to find those things that are calling your attention, because they're calling your attention for a reason. And when you place them all together, there is this possibility that what you're working on, or what you're attempting to bring into reality, is a fresh take, or it's something that could potentially be something new, because there is this like temptation, I think, for creatives, and personally speaking, it's always like this tempting thing to follow what's, you know, what's already working for, you know, in the market or whatnot. So I think the desire to do something new is a great motivation. It just makes the discovery process a lot more fun too.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that I was gonna add to that when the approach of us doing the magazine cutouts or like paper cutouts to find each letter and make that, the word mood board, uh, just because there is a lot of connection and relationships with us going in the hunt for something that fits our final idea. And I also feel like this mood board collage, the collage of the mood board word is a very childlike activity, which is something that like it's remove this hunt for words or like cutouts, images that we can put together that we have to make work. I
Mm-hmm.
think that exercise it's missing in the creation process now for most people
Mm.
because we have the tendency to do what's convenient, what's easy.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go
Yeah.
Instagram explore page or we go into Google Images. Yeah, we just try to look for these easy ways out
Yeah.
that I think we should reserve space for, let's say, going to a library,
Mm-hmm.
seeing what you could find there on stuff that's on books that is not online.
Yeah.
I know of a few friends that do that. They go
Yeah.
to libraries, they spend like the whole day there, and then yeah, it's people. This is people that only do research, that only do mood boards, that they
Wow.
put this like 40 plus, 50 plus pages of curated mood boards. That's that's a job, and it's very important because these people are curating and crafting this experience, this world
Yeah.
for you to see and for you to create based on that.
Wow.
And that's why I think mood board is this. I think mood board is like a starting point, or should be the starting point for for the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think mood board doesn't have to be limited to the like a 2D assets,
Mm-hmm.
but you could have objects. Hey, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like this object portrays or evokes the feeling that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I'm gonna make it a part of this research process.
Yeah.
And I think when you start thinking about the value of highly curating your inspiration and you're like trying to find the right amount of information out there to help you kickstart the creation process is it's important and highly valuable because these are, so to speak, the ingredients they're gonna use to cook this meal.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you have to make sure that these ingredients are pure,
Mm-hmm.
not processed, and you look for the exotic stuff. You look for the stuff that is not on the menu.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the biggest value that we wanna bring to the table with this podcast, with these conversations. It's about making the unknown known.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy with the ingredients. I think if we were to say that the farmer's market is like that nature's mood board, if you will, of ingredients, I like to source when I can ingredients from the farmer's market, and the taste is different. It's also just so good to know what farm things came from, to know their origin, and to know that there was care behind the cultivation of these things. And like what you mentioned earlier, where it changes the relationship when you know who, like, where this like piece of arugula or bushel of arugula came from, or where these eggs were laid, that kind of thing. I think bringing that same desire into the creative process, into the relationship between the producer and the consumer, is really important. And I think in our time, it's been a lot more convenient to go to a grocery store, or to go to these places that automate creativity, or automate images, or like mass curation, like in Google Images, search engines that decide what images to show you, images that other people took. I think it's really important to really bring back that connection. What do you think were the qualities of the people that were just dedicated to this discipline, to this profession of gathering and curating worlds?
These are people that are just, their mission is clear, their assignment is clear in terms of, let's find documentation on human ingenuity, or like human creative expression, and they try to, in different mediums, they try to capture throughout these mood boards different mediums, different ways that where humans have expressed themselves through a wider range of mediums, and try to craft that and put it together into this package. And they don't have to be visually consistent, because sometimes you can sprinkle throughout that mood board like contrasting concepts, contrasting ideologies type of situation. So then you allow the designer to make the connections themselves. Okay, how can I'm doing research on water and doing research on oils. I put that on a mood board, and I give that to designers, and then I let designers make this connection, or I'm open to interpretation of the designers, how they're going to incorporate water and oil throughout the product that they are creating. So yeah, it's very important. Just as much as the answer is important, I think what's more important is asking the right questions, and it relates to that analogy. It's not about the answer, but asking the right questions. And I think the mood board facilitates that process and triggers and gives you like a good challenge. It's a good challenge to have a pool of images that you have to work from, and there is value in that when given a creative brief, which is, unless you're a creative director or like in a high role in a creative field, most of creatives are working from a creative brief.
Yeah.
So it's important, no matter where you are standing in the creation process, to be open for people's interpretation of your ideas. And I think now that I think about it this way, I've seen that kind of approach in other fields, in other mediums. Like I think there is a film movie director that doesn't like to edit. So like he just shoots one scene, however it comes out, and that's it. I'm trying to emulate that approach with a project that I'm doing now, where I have finished the design of this product, and then I'm giving it to the 3D designer to model it digitally. But I'm not doing edits. I'm just, okay, if that's what you think it is, okay, that's what it's gonna be.
Oh,
Because yes, I'm open to people's interpretations, and I think there is beauty there, or it adds a level of uncertainty which I think humans are attracted to. Humans are attracted to suspense, drama, what's gonna happen next type of situation. So I
yeah,
think if we add that to the consuming experience, I think there is a higher level of interest or appeal that your product could have.
that reminded me of something that I recently heard yesterday. There's this composer, pianist, who his name is Glenn Gould, I believe, and he was criticized and often spoken about by the, I guess, the establishment of classical music because he would interpret compositions either too fast or too slow, or he would just add his own element. And in the classical music world, room for interpretation isn't really, at least at that time, I don't know what it's like now, but it was really like looked down upon and not really something that was encouraged. And he really pushed for that. And I think making space, or it's something that he said that resembled that what you said reminded me of, is that he wanted to turn the composition into a performance, right? And by you like creating something, writing the music, and you hand it off to a musician to perform it, it's okay, it's like a relay race, right? It's like you hand off the baton to someone else and they take it from there, right? And because they're human, they're not machines, they're going to interpret it through their mental models, through their lenses and their experiences. And that makes the creative process, it adds the drama and the interest to it, like you mentioned. And I think that's what makes it exciting to collaborate, I feel, with another person versus like maybe a chat GPT. And don't get me wrong, like I think it's cool to like I use it all the time to bounce off ideas, but it's not the same when, and I'm not comparing them, they're completely different, but there is this like element, this human element that I keep going back to and just keep thinking that I much prefer seeing someone, or knowing the story behind someone's career and why they choose to focus on certain things or emphasize certain things over others. And I think that brings me to a question for you about process and how your process has changed over time. Maybe you could share a little bit about the last, decade of your career, like how process has changed for you, if it has.
So yes, process has changed for me, not in terms of what I do, but it has changed in the way, in the order of what I do has changed.
Mm.
So sometimes I could start with reverse engineering something that I really like, and I reverse engineer it, and then once I go back or either use it as a starting point for something else, something new, it just allows me for a faster or a more honest way of making. And what I mean by honest is because I'm working already out of a visual object, something that already exists. So I'm getting real feedback from that object in terms of like proportions, materials, colors, how it has aged. So when you use that as a starting point, it yields for a more diverse, a potentially diverse outcome. So in general, yes, my process of creation has changed because I was used to starting with research, consumers research, and then trying to put those together and see how we can make a brief out of that. And then from that brief, you create this product that tries to check most boxes, and then you start development, and then you start marketing. Versus now, I feel like now it's more of like open-ended in terms of we could start with the end, we could start in the middle, we could start at the very beginning type of situation. And I'm not, every project is different, and also for me to reach the highest level of creativity, I try to throw myself challenges in terms of, okay, if I have this material, what can I create with this material as my starting point in the creation process? Or if I have this restraint, or if what I want to do can only be created in this small space, what can I create in this small space? So I think my creative process starts with simple creative briefs, but that are open-ended. And I think they use a similar. I heard of this approach during college, where the example was a hair dryer. If you ask someone to create a new hair dryer, they're gonna create the variation of a real existing hair dryer. But if you ask people, how can you accelerate the drying process of your hair, then you start coming up with interesting solutions to achieve that goal. So I think that's what it is in terms of like now, in terms of how can I create a shoe. I think about how can I achieve this goal faster, or how can I achieve this aesthetic fast, more accurately. So you start different briefs, and also I'm open to changing the course of the product creation throughout the creation process, because I have experienced that in my career, where as I'm making something, I find a better solution, or I find an alternative that I like better. So then I go in that route, but it was never in the roadmap of creation. So that I try to be open for those moments and actually pursuing those.
Yeah. So allowing yourself space for serendipity and surprises, not really like having constraints, but also balancing the keeping an open mind to better solutions when they present themselves and being sensitive to that. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I also want to talk about the conversations that we've had about the kind of people and guests that we want to bring on here too. Eventually, we've talked about bringing people from different disciplines and different backgrounds to talk about their creative process and maybe what they're paying attention to, what inspires them. Because I do think there's this opportunity to speak to people in two different, or like in two different sectors. Like for me, I right now my focus has been primarily in the digital space, in the digital world, through illustrations and designing digital experiences. But I've always had this, my training is in the physical world, and I think my heart still is in that space, and I have a lot of admiration for that space. And your world is with the physical and the tactile, right? And so I think that contrast, being able to speak to those two different worlds and speaking to people from both of those worlds is going to, I think, spark a lot of interesting conversation and ideas.
I agree. And hopefully this turns into a place where people can come and find potentially people that they want to collaborate with. Or yeah, if we just make this a space where people can find new talent. And yeah, we just make it a place where creativity thrives, connections thrives, conversation thrives.
Mm.
And yeah, and you never know, because I a lot of times I have come across things on podcasts. Hadn't I been listening to that podcast, I wouldn't have known of so and so, or I wouldn't have come across with a book, or and then you reach out to that person, and then the conversation starts, and then next thing you know, you're working with that person. So I wanna open this platform, open this space for those kind of scenarios that I hope it happens, and I hope it happens often.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you highlight something that is has been one of the most rewarding things for my person as well, just putting work out there on the internet and having that work attract or foster these connections between people that are complete strangers, but because the work was there and it resonated, we were able to like make a connection, and like collaborations turn out from that. And it's interesting too, right? Because it's this like social, and the internet allows us to transcend the physical limitations of our being in only one place, and allows us to be in multiple places at once. Like this podcast, this conversation will probably be listened to by people from all over the world. And yeah, like I really hope that it fosters creativity. And that was one of the things that our conversation last time did for me. Like I mentioned this to you after our call. I was like, I had seen things differently. I had started to notice things a bit more just from thinking about that concept of watch out for human ingenuity in the out there. Like I usually am very aware of like how things are made. I'm constantly looking at, oh, it looked like this process was used to make this thing, or oh, what kind of material is that? But it seemed like I had missed the human element part. Like what is this person, how is this person using this device or this thing, or how are they experiencing this space? um, how are they using this thing that wasn't meant to be a bench, but now they're using it as a bench? And I really do think that the conversations that we'll have here in the future will feed into that. It will feed into that awareness and the broadening, I think, of perspectives.
I agree. Yeah, that's a very important point for us to highlight, as as the reason of being here, and creating this um, being or child,
Mm-hmm.
because it is important to take the right steps to make this a reality. And yeah, I look forward to this conversation, hopefully a couple of years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and we look at it and say, I'm glad we did this.
Yeah, absolutely. I like these conversations become like time capsules in a way, right? Like they become ways to mark time. And I was reading the letters of Vincent van Gogh, and he's talking to his brother, and he's talking about being in this town, and he's noticing that there's more photographers there and that they're taking pictures. And he's making this comment about how these photographs of people's portraits, that they all look the same. They're the same noses, they're the same eyes, and they look like wax-like figures, he says, and that they're missing something. They look lifeless. And then he goes on to mention how when a person paints a portrait of another person, that resemblance, what comes out is a product of that person, of that artist's soul. And it really, like, it just seems so, it's the same theme throughout time, right? The same theme of this relationship between the machine and the mind and the human spirit, the artistic spirit. It's They can collaborate and create amazing new things, but they each have their strengths and they each have their weaknesses. But there is something special about the human spirit, the human approach, the imperfections of it. Like even this podcast, like it's already, like, I think I just froze. My video just froze, and like your video froze at some point. It's not perfect, and I'm not even going to try to fix that. I think there's some kind of charm to it not being perfect, and I think that it's fitting for the name too, because when you see a mood board, things are cut up, things are not exactly always aesthetically aligned, but they're a unique starting point.
Yeah, but it works.
Yeah,
It works, and I think your mind makes the connections. Your mind does the job to connect the dots or blend things in, and it's important for the mind to do that, to have that exercise,
yeah.
because it keeps us awake. And yeah, I just wanted to have a final thought in terms of this podcast and the importance and the relevance that this podcast has and will have an impact in future generations, because we are also recording ways of thinking, and that could help us hopefully document like creative approaches that people can come back and listen to if they're stuck like in a creative challenge, because that has helped me a lot in my career. When I'm
Mhm.
stuck in a place, creative place, I try to like, okay, let me do research about how something else was created, and maybe try to emulate what they did there in my case. How can I apply what I've what I learned in other case scenarios? How can I apply it to my experience, to my process? And hopefully something happens.
Yeah.
And I don't know, sometimes I don't feel like there is like the right tool, or sometimes we use the wrong tool but we make it work. And I think it's the example of the flat screwdriver, the flat screw,
Mm-hmm.
that is the most misused tool in a toolbox, because they use it for other things. And I
That's
think this is a similar case scenario where I hope people use this podcast to try to make things work like in a janky way. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, I love that. We're not really here to tell you how to think or prescribe anything for the creative process. We're just really fascinated by it and we respect it. And we just want to share our fascination with it and what we've learned throughout the process of it. I think that's a great way to cap it off. I think I froze in the video, so I have my hands up, which is great. But Cesar, thank you so much. This has been so good, and I'm so excited to just continue having these conversations. I love what you said about like recording ways of thinking. I think that's going to be like our guiding star and our reason to be. So I'm excited for the next one.
Me too. I look forward to continuing these conversations, and whoever listens to this first podcast chapter, we really appreciate it. We appreciate the support. We appreciate the interest in giving us an opportunity for us to be part of your creative journey.
Oh, that's said. Yeah, thank you so much for listening and hanging out with us.
Thank you for listening to Moodboard. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. And if we invite you to share it with someone you know. Until the next one.